Good evening. Welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs here. Thank you for taking time to come to the museum tonight. As you know, we hold a lot of public programs here, and they're all educational in nature, right? I mean, you learn something every time you come. But tonight, I think we're going to really learn some new things that will help us understand today's world just a little better. Let me start by asking everybody in the audience a question. Please raise your hand if you believe you have a solid understanding of what cryptocurrency is and how it works. 1, 2, 3. Well, we hope so. Point is, we don't all know about this, right? But it's important to learn, and we have two incredible speakers who not only understand this stuff very well, as the hands indicate, but are also able to explain it clearly to people like the rest of us. In addition, this being the Mob Museum, we'll focus on how criminals have used cryptocurrency in some very bad ways, and how law enforcement agencies have shut them down. This is really a success story in many ways that we're going to talk about tonight. I want to start by a couple of quick introductions. On the far end of the panel is Chris Janczewski. He's a former special agent for the IRS Criminal Division. He's led some of the nation's most important cryptocurrency-related criminal investigations, including several that we will discuss tonight, in fact, all of them. Chris recently became the head of global investigations for TRM Labs, leading a team of investigators that helps clients fight fraud, money laundering, and financial crime. So please welcome Chris Janczewski. And to my left is Zia Faruqui, actually Judge Zia Faruqui. He was appointed as a U.S. Magistrate Judge in the District of Columbia in 2020. He received his bachelor's in law degrees from Georgetown University. Judge Faruqui served for 12 years as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's offices in St. Louis and Washington, D.C. He prosecuted an array of cybercrime cases, including several of these that we'll discuss tonight. Please welcome Judge Zia Faruqui. So I think we should start by defining some terms, and this is where I'm going to turn over the bulk of the rest of the program to these guys, because they know this very well. So let's start, Chris, maybe with what is cryptocurrency, and sort of I'll throw out 3 questions and let you answer. What is cryptocurrency? What is the darknet, where a lot of this manifests, and how do investigators follow the money in these crypto cases?
Yes, first, thank you for having us. It's really an honor to be here. It's a beautiful building. It's really a unique experience for us to be here, and I really appreciate it. And so, yeah, I could certainly sit here and talk for hours of what is cryptocurrency and answer those questions, so I'm just going to try and hit it at like a high level, similar to like if we sat down at dinner, kind of a 5-minute explanation. By no means should you walk away an expert. So you can think, first of all, cryptocurrency, you could think of just digital currency. So think of an electronic means of converting value, US dollars. So like if you had a Starbucks gift card with $25 on it, that is a medium of transmitting funds electronically. You could take it one step further and think of virtual currency. And so that is similar in electronic format of financial an amount. And I like to think of like my son plays these video games, Roblox, he buys these Robux. It's connected, you buy it with dollars, but that doesn't actually have any real value. It's not backed by anything. And it just disappears instantly as well somehow. But then you could take it another step further of cryptocurrency, and that is a digital virtual currency that is backed by cryptocurrency, so cryptography, similar to like encryption. So you can think of just basically very complex math to make sure that it's correct. So you can think if you have a means of transmitting money, you want to make sure that somebody can't respend a dollar more than once, right? Because it's electronic, it doesn't really exist, it's not tangible, it's not in your hand. And one of the biggest things for cryptocurrency, specifically like Bitcoin, is that it's decentralized. So going back to my example about a Starbucks gift card, theoretically Starbucks could just cancel the card. Like if I reported it stolen, they could make the card null and void, potentially give you a refund, maybe transfer the funds to a different card. They're actually like, it's centralized, they control it. Much like US dollars are controlled by the Federal Reserve in the United States. Bitcoin's not controlled by a single entity, it's decentralized. So not one person could just be like, I'm going to shut it down. this bad thing happened, we'll make sure that nobody can spend the money. Or if you accidentally send it to the wrong person, there's no help desk to call to be able to get your Bitcoin back. It's gone. It's much like cash. If you send it out and somebody doesn't want to give it back to you, it's gone.
I like to say possession is 10/10 of the law. When it comes to cryptocurrency, sometimes it feels like it.
And then lastly, to touch on that's specific to cryptocurrencies, again, as an example, Bitcoin, the transactions occur on what's known as a public blockchain. So every transaction that's ever occurred with Bitcoin is public. You can see it. You can see that it definitely took place over my shoulder. In this example, it's a screenshot taken from the internet showing exactly that this transaction happened on this date. Address, you see the long string of one of the characters, numbers, and letters, sent an amount to 2 addresses on that date and time. Everybody agrees that it happens. It's backed by cryptography, so they can't fake it. They can't do it a second time. You see the date stamp that it occurred. But what you don't see is the context. You see address A sends to address B, but you don't know why. And that's the point of the investigation. You just find out who is behind it, who did this transaction, what is the context behind it. And to illustrate that point, I took an example from one of the cases that Judge Faruqui and I worked. And you can see here that that address, to provide some context, actually had to do with terrorist financing for a designated entity. Hamas is Al-Qassam Brigades, their military wing. And so if you were just looking at the transaction on the left, you wouldn't necessarily know that that had anything to do with terrorist financing. But by going through an investigation, finding things to connect it, evidence, more context, you can see that it did involve terrorist financing. And when I would bring these cases to then prosecutor Faruqui, he would ask me these questions of like how do you get from step A to step B? And a big part of it is, not to plug our company, but TRM Labs, we provide software that can help trace cryptocurrency payments to try and make this more automated and bring in more pieces of evidence like that from all sorts of different places. And so I always use the analogy of like looking at the public blockchain on the left is kind of like doing mathematics by hand, but being able to use software that can take those payments, automate it some, provide in more evidence. It's kind of like using a graphing calculator. You can exponentially do a better job.
I think I'll just add one quick thing, which is that the question most commonly asked is like, yeah, but like, come on, it's a computer thing. Why is it worth any money? And so I hear you, right? So Chris is the expert. He should have been raising his hand earlier, not me. I am not, but I know how to find the experts, which is important. But this is what I want you to just think about. 2 things. One is, I will pretend to say it was just growing up, not still currently, because I'm more mature now that I'm a judge. I like to watch professional wrestling, and there's always one person you watch with and goes, hey, this is scripted, it's not real. Like, oh my God, are you serious? No, I didn't know, thank you. And so, yes, I hear you. I understand that these are just a bunch of characters on a screen. And so I understand that that's hard to believe that it's worth money. But my second point to you is around Mother's Day and Christmas and every other holiday, my mother gives me what she wants. And it usually involves something that is gold-based or jewelry-based. And why is that valuable? Because my mom tells me it's valuable and I'm supposed to buy it for her. So, it's rare, right? It's shiny. But Bitcoin, we'll talk a little bit more, the way the software is created, it is rare. And just enough people have said that it is valuable, so I need you to think about this kind of like professional wrestling. I understand that intellectually it might seem hard to believe, but you just got to suspend disbelief and know that enough people are saying that there is value to this. So just let's find out, what does that mean?
So Chris, just as you were describing this really well, 2 words came up in my mind, like that you always hear when there's reference to cryptocurrency. One is it's anonymous and it's untraceable. This is how it's marketed, right?
Yeah.
But you guys have been able to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and nice segue into it's more generally considered to be pseudo-anonymous, so like kind of anonymous. And that, so you can see there on the address, you can see the transaction. If you did not know that was affiliated with Hamas's military wing, it would be anonymous to you. But like once you know that it is belonging to a terrorist entity, you can see every transaction that address has ever accounted for. And so you could go back to the beginning of Bitcoin and see this long history of every transaction. So theoretically, during a case, you would now realize, okay, this belongs to a state-sanctioned sponsor of terrorism, and you want to start looking at all the addresses that sent to it. So those are potentially terrorist donators. And then now you know the context of like, well, once they receive it, they can't necessarily buy ammunition with Bitcoin, generally speaking. So they're going to try and cash it out. So that the people they are sending money to is potentially the money launderers or just like cash remitters.
I mean, it's really, you have to always step back when you see this, and you hear people always say that it's untraceable, it's anonymous, and the answer is, well, so is cash, right? Cash is anonymous. That's why there's been a lot of judges and many court opinions have talked about that's one of the indicators maybe that there could be a criminal element to it. What's different is that if you pull out cash and look at the serial number, you have no idea what that means. It's completely meaningless. The government, I don't even think, keeps, once it goes from one person to, once it goes out of the bank, you never know where it's going. You got to understand with Bitcoin, imagine your bank statement and everyone else's bank statement was publicly available. It just said, person 1 deposited money on this date. Person 2 withdrew money on this date. Person 3 sent money to person 4. Now, who's person 1, 2, and 3, and 4? That's that guy's job. Figure that out. But you're still ahead of the game in terms of cash. You have no idea. There's obviously laws that if it's over $10,000, then sometimes you have to give your identification, things like that. But there are crimes people come up with. They structure their transactions under that. So I think, again, it's just that suspending disbelief. Some of that people are like, well, this just seems new and it's strange, and so it's anonymous and untraceable. It's like, well, lots of things are, but no one's banning the use of cash.
To your point, though, tell me if I'm right. If
You're right. I think I have to say that.
thank you.
It's your museum. But
if you're looking at cash versus Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, once you've figured out who owns that, you've kind of got them by the short hairs as a prosecutor, because now you've got a great case built up. So,
what's so interesting, and Chris, I think, will explain a little bit about the darknet and these other cases. I was a prosecutor. My experience in the past had been, you got to find out, was there a crime? Who did the crime? What was the nature of that crime? Look at that picture there, right? And Chris will show you some of the slides from our cases. All that matters here, no one's hiding that there's crime. No one was trying to pretend that, if it was or was not happening, it's just who was the person behind that moniker, right? The online screen name, right? I might think that I'm talking to a celebrity online, but could just be someone in their basement. But that's the key, right? It's not any sort of concealment. It actually is, you're right, so much easier in terms of our investigations. Once you figure that out, the cases are pretty straightforward.
Before we get to the individual cases we want to talk about, you mentioned it, why don't we talk about the darknet, what that is and why that's the place where many of these cases are happening.
Yeah. So you can imagine that if you think that you're being anonymous with a payment system, you're probably going to be potentially, if you have ill intentions, doing something that's a little more adventurous, doing something that you may not otherwise do if it was your credit card with your name on it, or a wire that came from your bank account, or something like that. And so the darknet, you can think of just the general internet to begin with. Think of they like to use this, seems like every presentation has a picture of an iceberg. And so you have the top of the iceberg, the thing that you can see everybody's aware of as CNN or ESPN.com. Those are all the places that generally a search engine like Google just follows links and indexes and you can go to. That's what most people are aware of. And that's just a small portion of the internet. If you go down below, underneath the water, there's the much larger portion of that iceberg. And that is considered the deep net. Those are all places that you need access to get to. There's nothing special about it other than just like a username or password. You can think of universities have massive amounts of information. Our own company, TRM Labs, has our own information that's accessible on the internet, but you need to be able to have the access, the credentials to get at it. And even further down that has special access is a part called the darknet, and you need a specific browser, and that, again, relies on encryption. And the whole point behind it is it masks the IP address, so that is like the address, be able to send information back and forth, much like a mailbox. It hides that for the website, so people can put out content that they don't think are going to be associated with them. But the user's IP address is also encrypted, and it's bounced off of 3 different places in the world at least. So it could be sitting here trying to access the darknet in Las Vegas. My data might be bounced to South Africa, then Germany, then Korea, and then finally the actual website itself. You can imagine all the challenges that presents for law enforcement to try and figure out who is doing this and who is helping them do this. And you mix that with an anonymous form of payment, it's ripe for illegal activity.
But what you have to remember is you can get on your smart device right now and download the browser, the Onion Router browser, Tor it's called, and get on the darknet. That is not a crime in and of itself. People can put legitimate things or illegitimate things on there. That's really up to them. The difference is just that, the challenge is when someone's doing something illegitimate, it becomes more difficult. I think of it my kids will never understand it. When I used to ask for directions for somebody, before you went to somebody's house, you pick up a phone, call them, you get landmarks and things like that.
Shocking.
And then there was then printing out the MapQuest, and eventually now it's GPS. I could not get anywhere without that GPS, right? And so to me, the example I give is for the dark web is like, it's like getting dropped into a neighborhood that's completely black. There's no street signs. There's no street lights. Someone has to tell you at the 3rd street, you turn left. The 2nd street, then you turn right. Go to the 4th house, knock 5 times, and say a password, and you can get in, right? If someone didn't tell you to do that, you would be lost, right? And so the dark web, these sites that you'll see here that Chris would investigate, it wouldn't be like you'd get on Google and say, where are terrorists, what are their terrorist websites? You'd have to get somebody in their club to give you that full, long, long address, and you'd type it into the special browser.
I'm just curious, Chris, just a quick question. You talk about, a lot of illegal stuff happens on the darknet. Is there any legitimate stuff on the darknet, or is it pretty much all bad, bad, bad?
Yes, it was actually created by the US government, of course. Makes perfect sense. And so
Naturally.
you could think of a legitimate reason of, say, you were behind in like a war zone or some place where journalists are oppressed, you can't get information out. It'd be very useful to have your information encrypted and go out of some place like Iran, and right now where there's protests, and be able to report out without feeling like that maybe you're putting yourself in jeopardy. And then it became a free project that everybody can take on and be a part of now on their own.
Gotcha. Well, good. Well, I think the heart of our conversation tonight is going to be about these specific cases that these guys worked on. Why don't we start with the North Korean hackers case?
Yeah. So North Korea, by the United Nations panel of experts reports, has, it seems odd to even say this out loud, has stolen billions, with a B, dollars worth of cryptocurrency. And a few years ago, Judge Faruqui and I, we were contacted by a victim in exchange that had lost over $250 million of cryptocurrency at the time. And
Just a bad morning to wake up to, I think, for a company.
yeah, and this is the press release, a couple screenshots of how it actually turned out. We ended up seizing some of the money back, indicting 2 individuals based out of China that we allege had laundered the funds, worked with our colleagues at Treasury to designate them, to sanction them so they could be cut off from the US dollar. And then we had another subsequent event. So I think in total we investigated about 6 or 7, 8 maybe different hacks that we allege were conducted by North Korea.
What was interesting about the hacks, you watch like Mission Impossible or any of the James Bond movies, and you're thinking it's like something just wild and amazing they're doing. And when Chris started investigating this, he's like, what it was just fascinating. They were just like, look, they went to an exchange like, we're really concerned. A lot of them are getting hacked. Can you download this attachment questionnaire we have and explain what your security protocols are so that we can know that we can trust you? And it's true they were testing them, but they didn't realize what they were being tested for. So they downloaded, of course, and that created, had the virus attached to it. So, this was what's, Chris knows my favorite cartoon on the internet is a cartoon where a person's going and they're robbing a bank, and the bank tells them, you can do this online now too, right? And so it's easy, right? When you're sitting home, just send 1 million of these, and you just need one person to accidentally hit download, and then you're getting hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it really interesting for North Korea to be able to try and pursue these thefts is traditionally, and I'm sure there's many examples downstairs in the museum, if you wanted to rob a bank, you had to physically go to the bank, you had to physically make entry, get the cash, and run away without getting shot in the process. Like, it's very dangerous, and if you want to rob a second bank, you need to go find the second one. Well, what if you could just potentially send out an email to every bank in the world while you're sitting in a heavily sanctioned country that you have maybe little fear of ever getting arrested by anybody for? And so it potentially could be very lucrative. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the way that they approached it. So like Judge Faruqui said, it started with an email, malware was attached, and myself, I studied as an accountant, worked at the Internal Revenue Service, criminal investigation, where we prided ourselves on following the money. So that was the way that we approached this case. It was not a ones and zero type of forensic analysis of looking at server logs or things that, frankly, we're not very good at, but instead following the money to see, like, okay, who's benefiting from it, who is profiting from it. Those are the people likely perpetrating the theft.
I mean, it was all about follow the money, right? That's what IRS became famous with Al Capone. And, I think Chris is the next generation of that when he was a special agent, is that let's level set and just remember, it's not about this technology getting, caught up in all of these fancy things. It's just a simple thing, right? Crime that we were investigating was profit driven. So let's just follow the money.
Yeah, and again, we could sit here for a few hours and really deconstruct each of the flows of the funds, but generally speaking, this graph illustrates it, and you may not be able to read it. You don't have to see all the details, but at the top, 2 different exchanges that were hacked at 2 different times, I think a few months apart, and you see the green lines coming beneath it. Those funds, once they were stolen, started to merge on the blockchain together. And that was a very obvious clue. That shouldn't be just a random situation. Think of like a stash house. It would be unlikely that two thieves would use the same kind of like stash house to steal all the stolen money. Like they would have to be related. It's just statistically would not make sense that there would be this overlap. And then because you can automate these transactions, it's very easy to send Bitcoin more than once. If you had 1 Bitcoin, break it into 8 parts of a Bitcoin and send them out, put it back together, combine it with other stolen Bitcoin as well. And so it went through these hundreds of thousands of different transactions. But then ultimately, it went to 4 different exchanges you see represented at the bottom.
Exchange is just like a bank, just so you understand. It's just the same thing. It's just like for cryptocurrency, as opposed to a regular bank, they call them exchanges. Sorry.
Yeah, great call. And so that's a place that you want to be able to, as law enforcement, be able to send a legal process to, so they provide records. And they have to, in the United States and other places generally, is they have to file know your customer procedures. They have to have information about their actual customers. So whether that's a driver's license, a name, email address, IP address, maybe you're taking a selfie-style photo of you holding up your ID. And so these were accounts that we allege were owned by North Korean hackers. And at first, if you just took a general glance at the pictures, you may not think anything about it. I redacted the faces and the actual IDs. But you can still see that there's some similarities right now that they're next to each other. The hands are in the exact same position on both photos. But the faces, even though they're redacted, you can see are quite different. The hair, for one, is different. The race looks a little bit different off. But they're also wearing the exact same T-shirt. And so using Google Images, we actually were able to reverse search.
Not we, Chris. This is Chris. So Chris, I would send subpoenas out for Chris, and he would then get hundreds and hundreds of pages and data back, and then this is what makes him so great, right? Is that he would look through, and it's not like conveniently here when you see the presentation, like, well, sure, that looks pretty similar, Zia. I'm seeing that, but Chris is looking through different exchanges, all that things, and he's like, wait a minute, I think I saw that white T-shirt, and then he goes back and puts them together. So he's being very polite when he says we, but really it was him. So yes.
It's a team game.
Yeah.
Also, I only tell you the parts where I was successful. I don't tell you the 1,000 things that did wrong that did not work. But you were able to find the actual picture of this person that's represented in this Know Your Customer photo that was submitted. So it looks to me that they had actually photoshopped the face from an open source picture, pretended to be that person, because of course you don't want to be like, I'm so-and-so in Pyongyang, I would like to have an account here. It's probably going to get shut down pretty quickly.
I mean, just think of this, right? It's super interesting when you think about the work and the sophistication that the criminals are getting into, right? This is not about Bitcoin. This is just them going and tricking a bank. They went to a bank and they said, I want to deposit my money in this bank. And the bank said, sure, give me your but it's all online. So they said, give me your picture and hold up a driver's license. The reason they say that is that they're trying to, again, defeat someone just using a picture off the internet, right? That was like generation 1. They said, just send us a picture. And then they realized, well, anyone can just get a picture off the internet. So now generation 2 is, okay, hold up your driver's license. Now generation 3 is, hold up your driver's license, and I'm going to send you a unique message, and you hold that up there so we can see that it's you. But this is the cat and mouse game, right? That's what the museum is all about, is how do the mice keep trying to figure out ways to evade the cat?
Yep.
And again, the goal for them is to not necessarily get away, but at least have a good enough attempt to try and get the cryptocurrency into traditional fiat, whether that's US dollar, Chinese yuan, or something else, or euro. And so, again, you can't just have an account that says, I am North Korean. You need to be able to try and get some other way to get the funds out of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. So here are a couple of examples. In law enforcement, when we would have undercover take place, we would do this thing called backstopping. You couldn't just take Chris, go take him to the seedy part of town and drop him off and be like, hi, I'm a drug dealer. I'd like to purchase drugs. And like, where are you from? Like, you would have to have a story. You'd have to try and try and fit in, of course. And they would do the same thing. So on the top right, you see that they actually created a LinkedIn page. Or excuse me, that one's Twitter. The one below it is a LinkedIn. And you'll see some of the crossover with the names and the company. They said that they worked for Celis LLC, and that's a screenshot at the top left. Celis LLC was this cryptocurrency website where you could download a application to be able to trade, allegedly, trade cryptocurrency. But want to guess what was actually in the software?
Who's going to guess? Was it not malware?
It was totally malware.
Yeah.
Yes, they would just take over.
Don't go to that website later and download the software from there.
Yes, they would just take over the private keys. Those are like basically the passwords to be able to control your cryptocurrency. And once they have it, you don't control anymore. They do. Whoever has the keys controls the crypto. So once they move it, again, decentralized, you can't claw it back. You can't call the 1-800 number for Bitcoin and get it back. On the bottom right is a screenshot from VirusTotal. That's a place that you could take your software, upload it, and people could vote that yes, it is not malware. It's a safe application. You could download it. You can see that there are 2 positive votes that it's totally not malware, but those were from North Koreans that were connected to those social media accounts. So if you trust them, maybe that was worthwhile for you. In the bottom left are a couple different points which I think set them apart that really made it interesting, is their ability to use these free different tools. So they had a phishing campaign where they would send emails saying that, we want to check out your exchange, can you download this attachment? Or they would be like, I'm this developer, come check out this website, Salus LLC, direct the traffic there. Or they would also be like, I'm a prospective developer as well, can you download my CV, my resume, which again, embedded with malware. And they would trick people into do it. It's a numbers game. If you send out 1,000 emails, but only 2 people do it, but if you can get $1 million out of it, that's still a pretty good success rate. And they would use these free tools to be able to do mass mailers. They would send out hundreds of thousands of emails to all sorts of people. So it would be exchanges, people affiliated with exchanges, people they believe just own cryptocurrency. They could use these free tools to see, did the person open the email? Did they click the link? Did they come back and look at it a second time? Did they forward it? They would use these translation services because English may not have always been their first language. They would try and make it look professional with the footers and everything and make it seem like a polished email to increase the chance that somebody would click on it. And so we mentioned North Korea conducts the hack. They get the cryptocurrency. Again, they're moving hundreds of thousands of transactions, but then they want to offload it. And these are screenshots from the 2 Chinese nationals that we allege were doing the laundering for the North Koreans. And these are just the open source ads. If you, just like anybody else, could have went to this site and tried to engage with them. And so the one on the right, I think, is the most interesting, and they were willing to sell or purchase your Bitcoin in exchange for iTunes gift cards. And so this person was really, allegedly, ingenious in the way that they did it. So one, they linked up with a hacker who just wants to unload cryptocurrency, so they're going to take a 30% cut. So already you're making money. And then they have somebody that wants to purchase the Bitcoin from them because they need to be able to sell it to make money. Somebody would send them these iTunes gift cards, and you think like, okay, $50, $100 at a pop. Well, they were doing millions of dollars worth of iTunes gift cards. That's a lot of different iTunes cards.
A lot of songs.
Yeah.
And then they were actually then selling the iTunes gift cards in US dollar in China for a premium because they're hard to come by in China. They have to be usually Chinese yuan instead. But some of the takeaways that they don't ask questions. They don't ask for your picture ID. They don't ask for whatever. And so you can imagine that if you're trying to unload stolen Bitcoin, this is a very lucrative idea for you, even if you have to take a 30% cut. I think it actually says at the top the margin, but it, like on its face, does not seem like a great deal.
One thing I think before we get to this one, a little bit of context. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, one of the reasons that this is such a big deal for North Korea is there are very severe sanctions by the U.S. and the United Nations against North Korea, right? So
Yep.
Economically, they're not in a great place. So this is one way for them to get around the sanctions.
Yeah, exactly. That was the allegation in our documents when we filed them. I was actually prosecuting now one of Chris's colleagues, Nick Carlson. He was the world's, and is still the world's expert on North Korea. And so he worked with me in the beginning on the traditional. So we charged the largest ever 32 North Korean nationals who operated their foreign exchange bank. It was the first arrest in the history of the United States of a North Korean extradited in the United States. And so, we were following. And this was, again, it's got to the 2 billion mark. But as we saw, as Nick was so effective in following, and his team at the FBI and Homeland Security, the team out of Colorado Springs, Tom Tamsey, they were following the money. They were able to get it. We started seeing some of drop off, right? Because if you could go to the traditional banks and say, hey, these are the front companies, these are the guys putting on the fake mask and sending the money through, they could stop that. And so this became, sort of their perceived lifeline. But, enter Chris, stage right, because then he goes and starts seizing that money as well. But, they have to find ultimately a way to buy things.
Yeah. Now, this next case, this is where things get, stealing somebody's money is one thing, but this next case, this welcome to video case, delves into something quite a bit darker. So I just wanted you guys to be aware that we'll handle it delicately. But I mean, this is where, where law enforcement becomes so important. It's one thing to steal money. It's another thing to be involved in child exploitation, that kind of thing. Let's talk about this one.
I think just as a sort of bottom line up front, Chris and I have many times told each other it's pretty both amazing and also dispiriting when you know the best thing you've ever done in your life you've already done. And it is this case right here because, you'll hear the sort of story, but at the end of it, ultimately, thanks to this amazing work of our team, there are other prosecutors as well who are working with us, Yuli Lee, Lindsay Suttenberg, Alden Pelker, and the team, again, Tom Tamsey, and our staff, the U.S. Attorney's Office as well. Ultimately, all of us, this team effort led to 25 infants and toddlers who are today not being raped. And so, that's pretty hard to get past that in terms of what am I proud of that I've done with my life. But Chris can tell you about, that's the end of the story. How did we get there?
Yeah, so on the left is a picture that is what we refer to as a splash page. So because, when you take over something as the government, what is one of the first things you want to do is put up a nice picture over it and let everybody know that it is now property of the government. And here is a picture of our different SEALs from the different agencies that work together. So like Judge Faruqui said, IRS criminal investigation where I was at, Homeland Security, the Korean National Police, the United Kingdom's NCA, their version of like the FBI, and then also police from Germany as well. And at the bottom, you see all the different countries. Those are countries that actually made arrests in their country from leads, so actual clients that were purchasing child exploitation material from Welcome to Video. So it started in August 2017. This is one of the first cases that Judge Faruqui and I worked together and had no prior experience in child exploitation, no prior experience really for our child exploitation investigations. And again, we just approached it of like, well, I think we can follow the money. Why don't we try and see if we can follow the money? Who's behind this? And that was, again, always the mantra at IRS.
Yeah, so we're very lucky. We had another colleague, Ari Redboard, who's now also at TRM Labs, and he's a national security prosecutor, but he had some experience prosecuting these cases as well. And so, that was great about the team, right? It was great about the government and public services that there were subject matter experts within each one of these fields, and so we could draw on them to build our sort of team.
Yeah, so like we don't necessarily have to have the expertise. Like I would say when doing drug investigations, like I don't need to be proved that it's cocaine. If you just tell me it's cocaine, that's fine. Just point to the guy you think is the drug dealer and I'll see where the money goes. Like I'll just take your word for that part. And that was kind of the theme amongst these cases. So this started in August 2017. December or so, we started doing the first arrests of alleged clients of the website, people that actually purchased child exploitation material. And then we had the actual takedown in March 2018. And you can imagine that was only a few months. In the world of federal investigations, that is light speed. That is very uncommon that an international investigation is going to go that quickly with multiple different agencies in different countries, in different jurisdictions. But again, it was a testament to the team really working together on and being just singularly focused on trying to be able to take down this threat.
Yeah, but again, to be clear, we don't want to get into any details because it's quite graphic, but and the documents are all public and they explain very clearly what the content of the site was. But it was a site on the darknet that was dedicated to child pornography. And one of the things, again, when I started, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be, I assumed like the gamut of like 13 to 17-year-olds, and it was mostly infant and toddlers. That was being violated. And so, as a parent, Chris is a parent, it was terrifying, right? Because you think of your own kids. And it was certainly what motivated the team. I mean, we had a colleague, Kim, who was at a family event, and she does this crazy mountain biking in Colorado, and she was injured. And I was like, Kim, we just got to lead back in here. We'll get to it tomorrow. And she's like, no, I'm leaving this family event, and I'm going to find a way to get someone to help me get back into the building and start working. Because a kid could be hurt right now. And again, we're talking about just baby. It's just truly horrific material that I did not know even existed. And then once you do, it's just kind of hard to close your laptop and be like, I'll get to this tomorrow. Because you kind of understand the consequences of what happens if you don't. And this content actually this site was the first one to really monetize this. Before, one of the examples we always got from, when Ari was explaining to us how they used to prosecute these cases, like it was like, baseball cards. People would trade one for the other. You had to find somebody, you could trust them. It wasn't the to catch a predator scenario, right? That they were actually within this world. But once the darknet came up, and they thought, because cryptocurrency was anonymous, that they could just advertise it, right? So this went to that kind of streaming Netflix model instead of like trading. They centralized it in one place. What they didn't realize is that Chris and his team had this ability to follow the money.
And quickly, here are some of the stats. 8 terabytes of content was seized from the server during the takedown, over 340 arrests worldwide, and to Judge Faruqi's point, 25 victims actually rescued, which is just, again, as somebody who studied accounting in college, amazing to think that following money could actually impact real people's lives and see them put in a better situation in life. And as we'll get to, the alleged administrator was arrested in Korea the week after the Olympics that Korea hosted it, so very impressive on their end. But it's led to actual real demonstrations in Korea, legislation changes, and somewhat of a movement, which is, again, just amazing to be able to see. These are a couple safe-to-view screenshots of the website itself to give it the context of the financial component. So starting at the top left, you see after you had created a username or password and logged into the site, you would be assigned an individual Bitcoin address. So each account, so being able to log into the site, we realized that each account received its own address. That was critical context for being able to look at all the public transactions on the ledger. So if every address that we thought was affiliated with the website should theoretically be an account associated with. So we had an idea of like how many potential users were on it. We also then had undercover send payments to the site and see what would happen, and saw that the money didn't come out, you couldn't withdraw your funds. And so that was important context to know, well, where did our undercover money go next? That was probably the person controlling the website. And the way it worked is that you would send Bitcoin in and you would be given points. And the only thing you could do with the points is redeem for these videos, this content, and download it. There was nothing else you could do with the funds. You can also see that on the bottom left that you could get points if you created your own content and uploaded it to the site, and then every time somebody downloaded it, you could get more points. So there's this other financial kind of incentive to create this new unseen content, because it would generate more points for you that you could then redeem on the website as well. And lastly, to Judge Faruqi's point, and you could think of all the affirmative steps that you would have to go to. You would have to download the browser for darknet, you would have to know the address, you'd have to create a username and password, you'd have to go to Exchange, create an account, maybe hold up the picture, fund it with your bank account, send Bitcoin to your unique address, and a lot of affirmative steps. And there was no hiding the ball of why they did it. Here it very clearly says, do not upload adult porn. And there was actually a function to make sure that it wasn't duplicate videos being uploaded.
Yeah, there's no accidents here, folks. If you were on this website, you planned to get there, you planned to get the content there, you knew exactly what you're getting into. So one of the fears always in these cyber cases, like again, I'm not some super sophisticated computer person, so like, oh my gosh, did I click on some wrong link and something like that happened, like I accidentally got this? That's not who we were looking for. We were looking for the people who methodically went through step by step to get some of the most horrific content that actually had been swept out of a lot of websites. After some of the other ones had been taken down, Silk Road, Alpha Bay, people said there's 2 things we won't have on our website, child pornography and murder for hire. So of course, then that created this market where some guy's like, well, I'm gonna make that child pornography site.
Yeah, and it was really a broad swath of people from socioeconomic, economic and diversity of backgrounds that were clients of the website. And you can see here that it was actually 2 federal agents that were active federal agents were clients of the sites that we arrested. Also,
not IRS though. That was.
I won't say who, but maybe the picture will give a hint.
It was in the press release.
It wasn't. Yes, it was.
There was also an assistant principal and some other people you see here that were associated with it, and a testament to the team that our focus was always on taking down the site itself, the administrator, the potential people running it. But when we saw that there were potential high risk people that had potential contact with children, that we stopped whatever we were doing to focus on those and bring those people and be arrested and at least interviewed very quickly. So we sent money to the website, we had an understanding, we looked at the blockchain, see where did it go. Again, we could spend a lot of time kind of going through each transaction, but ultimately we were able to connect it to an alleged administrator in Korea. And ultimately the team Judge Faruqui and I, our colleagues from Homeland Security, UK's NCA, went to Korea the week after the Olympics for the takedown. The Korean police went to the alleged administrator's apartment, and what is like the best thing that you could find if you think that somebody's running a darknet child exploitation site in their house is the computer sitting on the floor actively running the website from their bedroom. And that is, you would agree as a former prosecutor, that is pretty good evidence, I would hope.
That's what Chris always says, we like to call that a clue. Yes, that was a clue.
Yes, and here you actually have the private keys, so those are like basically the passwords to run this darknet site that we talked about before. And on the right, and so again, over 340 arrests worldwide, and our focus was on the administrator. We were able to take down the alleged administrator, take the site down. The US government and other governments are not in the business of running a darknet child exploitation website. So what did we do? We don't want to jeopardize these 340 leads around the world while people are still trying to build those cases. So we worked with the Korean police. They actually made this image. It looks similar to the same format and type of welcome to video, except for it says the website's down for upgrading, so that hopefully they wouldn't be tipped off and start deleting all of their evidence. And then a few months later, when we actually had the press release, we swapped that one for the splash page that we had showed earlier.
And again, this is not unexpected in the darknet. It's what's called a rug pull, right? Like think of it literally, the old example, someone pulling the rug right out under you. When you give your money to a darknet child pornography site, at some point the administrator could say, well, I'm making $1,000 a month if I let you, store your money and buy stuff, but if all of you put $1,000, then there's $1 million in here. How about I just take all your money? Because you can't call up the cop, Chris, and say, hey, I just sent $1,000 to this darknet child pornography site, and that guy took my money. You won't believe it. And Chris says, great. Tell me your name and address. I'll be right over. And so, it wouldn't be surprising for someone who's on this site to think that, yep, I sent them my money, whatever. They shut this down. They got enough, and now I got to go find a new site or something like that. So that wouldn't necessarily spook somebody that happened.
This whole thing was basically operated by one individual, or was there more? I know there's one 23-year-old kid, right?
Yes, that is what the US government alleges, that he was the sole administrator of the website. And now, of course, the clients are providing the content, paying into it. But basically, he was the operator of the site.
Yeah, just doing it from his, he's living with his dad in, just a 2-bedroom, whatever apartment. And he just had a stack of hard drives up there, right? Like, this is not like, you might think of like NORAD or something like that with these like computer screens everywhere. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. One of the problems with the darknet, this is very slow because it's jumping around from all these spots. So think about it. If I wanted to get from here to the exit, if I go to a straight line, it's very fast. But if I'm trying to lose my, the cops who are following me, Chris, and I go behind here and then go behind there, then circle around 10 times to get there, it just goes slowly, right? And so that's one of the problems is the darknet. It can be really slow, and Chris and the team use those. He always gives the example when you're climbing a mountain, you have to be perfect every time. You can't make one mistake. If you do, you fall off, right? The consequences are catastrophic. So, Chris and his team use this to try to follow and eventually figure out, right? It wasn't as simple as just like, how do we know this guy's in Korea? There was a ton of work that they put in to figure out where he made one mistake and then figure out from there, is this in fact where he said he is? And then to see it's just this one guy in his house running this entire thing. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, again, I think that goes back to the importance of following the money and seeing who is profiting from it. It's really hard to be able to say that, like, I had nothing to do with it, but all the money came to me. It's just coincidental. It's like my lucky day. And on the inverse side, a lot of credit to Homeland Security investigations, and that oftentimes, for whatever reason, maybe there just wasn't time to do an arrest or a search warrant, they would do what's called a knock and talk, where they go and knock literally on somebody's door and confront them about something. And I was very impressed with how successful they were. It was like 9 out of 10 times or something like that, that somebody would confess. And you can imagine that if law enforcement knocks on your door and says, did you download child exploitation material, you probably don't want to confess to the police, but like once you have an account that they can show that you definitively sent money to a website, you can explain to the site how it works, there's no other reason you would send the funds, there really isn't too much you can say at that point.
Now, I'll just give you one quick example, because I think it's so telling of the work that Chris, and using this sort of how he traced the transactions. Of course, it takes place right around the holidays, because as Chris's wife likes to remind me, that's when I would call him and say, I need to borrow Chris for like 72 hours where he does nothing but work. And she's like, sure, Zia, that sounds great. So anyway, there was, this was around the Christmas holidays, and there was we were trying to your point, find, is there another person running this website, right? Because we want to go after the kingpin. You want to go after, that's no different than any organized crime prosecution. You go for the top, and then you work your way up to the top so you can get people to cooperate. But ultimately, who is the top, right? That's question number one. When we start on day one, Chris finds a website, who is running this? And we thought there might be a person who was running this site in tandem in the United States. And one guy, in fact, said, if you have a problem, because there was a message board on the site, said, if you have a problem, contact me. I'm your go-to tech help. He was not. He was actually someone just trying to get people's login credentials, and again, would just rob them, take their money, and download the content for himself. So no honor among thieves on this website. So what was fascinating is that, so Chris immediately was like, I think this guy might be administrator. He figures out using a lot of different tools, and again, it's a lot of just elbow grease at the end of the day. It's not like super sophisticated data analytics and things. It's just, when I used to be a prosecutor, there was a guy there who, he always just said, cops have forgotten how to do, just roll up your sleeves and do some cop work. But Chris knew how to do that, which was sit there, pour through the records. And so he was able to figure out what the guy's online moniker was. Then he found someone else who also used that online moniker. They had an Amazon wish list, had a lot of inappropriate things on it that he'd set up separate from his family's regular Amazon wish list. And so then Chris is following through, and I will never forget for the rest of my life this phone call I get from Chris. He's like, hey, you remember that guy as the administrator? I was like, sure, yeah, I remember that you thought. He's like, yeah, he's not, he's just robbing people's money. But what's wild is that at the beginning of the investigation, unfortunately, something I also will not forget is we had to watch a couple of the videos, right? So, look, this is just so that when we got before a jury or that we got before our managers, when they said, why is a accountant and a money laundering prosecutor looking at this case, like, why does this matter? So we could make our closing argument and say, here's what I had to watch happen to a 3-year-old child. And so we watched a handful of them, and because Chris is Chris, he's like, do you remember those videos we watched? I said, yeah, Chris, I do remember. Unfortunately, I remember very well. I was like, I recognized when I was looking at this guy who was the administrator, he has with his girlfriend a GoFundMe page where he's trying to adopt the girlfriend's daughter. Oh. And I remembered this is one picture on the GoFundMe page. I remembered the fleece that little girl was wearing was a fleece that I saw in one of the videos we watched when a child was raped. And I was like, you cannot be serious, Chris. There's no way. It's like, no, I am. I actually went back and looked at the video again. It's the same fleece, and there's a distinctive room, right, that it occurs in this apartment, and that little girl is wearing that same fleece, and it looks like that room. And so he called up one of his colleague IRS agents. Again, this is around the holidays, right? And that guy gets on an airplane the next day, flies down to Texas. Chris is going through, and we are furiously trying to get together the first ever criminal complaint in the District of Columbia on a Bitcoin case. So the judge is like, what's Bitcoin? What are you talking about? And so, that's our job, right? When I was a prosecutor, now as a judge, the job of the lawyer is to take something super complicated and make it digestible and understandable. And so we talked about, Chris just followed the money. It doesn't matter if it's called Bitcoin, US dollars, euros, he followed the money. Here, we need to explain to you other than that same fleece was in this one, and the IRS agent who went down there saw the building. It was for sale recently, and so they were able to get, from the realtor, the pictures, and within 72 hours, Lindsay, Chris, Tom are down there. They pull over the agent, who's obviously carrying a gun because one of the law enforcement agents, take him away, interviewed. He makes admissions. They find the little girl, get her to a trained psychoanalyst who goes and gets her eventually to admit what happened, and even that she had told her mom that it happened, and that her mother told her she was just dreaming because she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend. And so, again, just completely wild. But in 72 hours, over the holidays, Chris and his team is there, and they rescue this little girl.
Yeah, and again, to think about following the money is what set the stage for all of that to happen. So if not for that, could all those other dominoes have fallen and led to a successful recovery? We'll never know, but certainly it helped in that situation.
We've got 2 more cases we want to get through. We got to go a little quicker these next 2,
Yeah.
but they're important. So drug trafficking, this is opioid trafficking.
Yeah, that's right. So previously, Judge Faruqui had mentioned that on the darknet, if you think that nobody can figure out who you are, you can be pretty explicit in what exactly your intent is, whether that's child exploitation or selling drugs. Generally, you think of a drug deal, a hand-to-hand, of hey, man, you got this stuff, using some type of jargon, whatever, to conceal what you're talking about. On the darknet, you don't need to do that. You just put up there, I've got the best drugs ever, and someone's like, yes, I did it, 10 out of 10, did not wake up for 4 days, would totally buy again. And there's
Yeah.
a whole rating system.
It's
You
just
can
like
see the
eBay
pills.
or Amazon. I mean, you get review. I mean, these are actual screenshots from darknet websites where this guy was the largest darknet vendor of opioids was selling his stuff.
And basically the way that worked, and we'll see another visual, is that they would source the pills from Costa Rica, from pharmacies, and there's some allegations that it was connected to organized crime as well. They would do bulk shipments of the pills back to the United States. In this instance, they would put them inside of maracas to be able to conceal it. You shake the maracas, sounds like beans or whatever is normally in it, except for it was a bunch of pills. Maybe throw in some coffee to throw off a dog or something. And then once you get to the States, you have these kind of reshippers that would break it down into increments of 5, 6, 7 pills, whatever the person actually purchased, and then it would come quickly to you 1 or 2 days using Priority Express envelopes like that.
So you're here in the United States. You're in, let's say, me in Washington, D.C. Instead of having to go down, find a drug dealer, not get robbed or anything, from the convenience of your home, just like you're ordering something off of Target.com or Amazon, you get on the dark web, you find multiple Oxy vendors. Here's someone who posts a review online on Reddit and talks about how great it is, right? The product was legit. And that you get it gets shipped to somebody in the United States, a reshipper, who they may or may not know, right? Like they may have no idea. Someone just like gets on Craigslist and says, I want to look for some employment, and the person's like, okay, I'm getting some packages sent there. Do not open them. It's really private stuff. When you get it, just go get a new shipping label and then resend it to somebody in there. And they're like, okay, I mean, that's weird, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily sound criminal. And for convenience of your home, you get these pills sent to you.
So on the right is kind of an illustration to show how the flow works. Starting at the top, you have the pharmacist, the alleged source of many of the pills in Costa Rica. Then you have the darknet market, so going back to Silk Road, Alpha Bay, and others, as they kind of were taken down by law enforcement, a next one pops up. And one of the great things about the darknet is like people don't actually know who you are. They only know you as a username, right? And so you can imagine that if I am drug dealer 5 on Silk Road and everyone's like, yes, you're the best drug dealer, I'm always going to buy from you, but then it gets taken down, and then Alpha Bay pops up, you don't want to be drug dealer number 6. You don't want to have to reprove yourself.
Yeah, you got a brand.
Yes. So you're drug dealer number 5 again. Well, what if law enforcement has those records and able to make those connections? So now you've got to make this distinction of, should I try and be a new brand, or should I just keep going, knowing that potentially law enforcement has data? And so we would look at the records from the various exchanges that were taken down as well, see the transactions, and again, follow the flow of like who is profiting from selling these drugs. And ultimately, most of the Bitcoin in this example went to an exchange, BTCE, which is alleged to be one of the largest money launderers for cryptocurrency in history. I think at one point, like 25% of the flow of Bitcoin was flowing to the exchange. And there's allegations that it took nothing more than like saying your name is Mickey Mouse to be able to open an account. There was no real accountability. So a perfect place to be able to cash out drug proceeds, as you can imagine. And you can imagine that if you're going to be profiting from cryptocurrency, selling drugs, that you would maybe want to conceal it to yourself, not post about it on social media, and kind of flaunt where the funds came from. But you can see ultimately the funds were converted to cash and then deposited into U.S. bank accounts.
This is the person who's alleged to have been getting the drugs from the pharmacist who was allegedly getting them from organized crime, because the volume was enormous. It's just absolutely enormous. And as that review talked about, this was the old formula of Oxy, which you could crush and ingest, and so easier to get to your high quickly. But you saw that he was, allegedly spending his Bitcoin on all these luxury items. So again, things that Chris was looking at as he was doing the investigation with DEA.
Yeah, and all these pieces, I think of it as like each of these cases is the investigation is like a war on multiple fronts. You have one side, you're focused on following the money. You have another side that once you have an identity, maybe you're looking at social media and see what's available to everybody to be able to draw in. At the same time, you're getting emails, and maybe you get back 1,000 emails, and you look through just that one time where they send out an email to an exchange somewhere else, and you go and get their records, and you keep pivoting, keep taking these pieces and try and build back this puzzle picture. And you may never get all the puzzle pieces for this picture. You look down at it, you may want all of them, but you're never going to get every single piece.
Well, yeah, that was the prosecutor's job, because the agent would say, prosecutor, we're ready, and the prosecutor would say, no, I got to go to court on this, you need more. And so they always keep saying, until eventually the agents say, enough's enough, you can charge this case, and I say, okay, fine, I'm going to go do it. But
Right, so I would get the evidence, I would get these puzzle pieces, make the picture, and I would say, Prosecutor Faruqui, this is definitely a duck. And he's like, well, how do I know it's not a goose? And then you kind of get enough pieces to go, I can't guarantee that it's never going to be a goose, but I'm fairly certain it's a duck, and there's only so much we can do, and you got to make a decision at that point of how to move forward.
So the last one we're going to talk about is all of these are horrific crimes. Here's another example of where cryptocurrency is used to finance terrorism.
Yeah, and I know we're running up on time, so I was just going to briefly mention this. You can read the actual DOJ press release if you just were to search for Department of Justice, Hamas, Bitcoin. And this is the team, again, from FBI, Homeland Security, and IRS Criminal Investigation, along with Judge Faruqi's former office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., had 3 different terrorist financing campaign investigations: Hamas, Al-Qassam brigades, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Each one was unique. On the left, starting with Hamas, they had a website where you could go to get a Bitcoin address and donate to their cause. In the middle was a similar one with Al-Qaeda, where they were using more social media, think of like Facebook, as well as encrypted messaging applications, and they would have chat rooms that people could share information in. And then lastly, ISIS was purporting to sell you PPE at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And so they were kind of getting 2 hits. One, they would try and steal the person's credit card, allegedly, but then also when you tried to purchase the PPE equipment, you obviously did not get it, and the money would then go to terrorist financing for ISIS, which is probably the last thing you want to do in the middle of a pandemic when you need gear.
And the undercover communications revealed, Homeland Security out of Philadelphia. Ryan Landers was the supervisor, and it was fascinating. These undercovers revealed conversations where, these were first responders, firefighters, elder people in nursing homes were trying to get this. They were going because everyone was right desperate in the beginning to get any material, and they had this really sleek website where they claimed that they had been doing this for years, but through the investigative team, we realized they were not at all that, but that they were really targeting vulnerable people.
This, I think the website was stood up in February 2020, which is very, visionary of them to think of that at that time. But I just wanted to flag those for the awareness, if people want to read it on their own. I know we're coming up on time.
I'd love to get questions, I think, too, right?
We want to get to questions, and I just have one question before we get to questions, and that is, these cases are from like 2018 to 2021 or so. Like, what do we need to worry about in the future? Where do you think these things are headed?
I'll hand over to Chris. Since I'm a judge, I can't really prognosticate in the future, but I know Chris this is really the work that he does every day now. I mean, he's had so many things going on.
Yeah, I think there's kind of like 3 tiers of cases. You can think of an exchange like the North Korea hack. An exchange is $200 million of cryptocurrency is stolen, and then it's laundered back to North Korea. So if not for cryptocurrency, that case just does not exist. There's no cryptocurrency, there's no exchange to hack. That's a pretty obvious cryptocurrency only type of case. Then the second tier would be something like a darknet market, where you still have the tangible side, you still have the pills coming through the mail, you still have kind of the similar law enforcement techniques, but a lot of that is facilitated by cryptocurrency. People are less likely to buy drugs through the internet if they have to use their credit card, right? And then I think the third tier is where there's the most growth, and those are like traditional crimes, like a romance scheme that maybe you hear of, like so-and-so is in the military, they really want to meet you soon, totally gonna get married, just send me some money for a plane ticket. Well, now you can send the money through cryptocurrency, or they could be able to set up a website to be able to track people. And the site might be still traditional, sending them dollars through a bank account, but if they paid for the site using cryptocurrency, that is still an important part of the case. I would like to call it like the bloody footprint in a crime scene. Like, you wouldn't just ignore that one print if you didn't know how to do cryptocurrency investigations. It's still very material. It's still something that could blow the case wide open, but it isn't necessarily every part of the entire case. I think that's the area we're seeing more and more of that expanding.
All right, very good. So we want to take a few questions from the audience. We will bring around a microphone if you raise your hand, and because they're on a live stream, so we want everybody to be able to hear you when you ask your question. I got to believe we have a few questions. Paul, you have to have a question. It's a complicated topic, but it...
All right, we got a question.
There we go. We'll bring a microphone to you.
Hi there. I'm just curious whether the numbers of these cases that are being prosecuted, investigated, is going up or down with the ease of drug flow just driving across the border now versus having to use other more nefarious ways of getting into the country? Is it just easier and there's less sales on the dark web, or is it still just as much and there's just extra supply now in the country?
So I don't have macro numbers to say definitively, but my general impression from watching it is that it's increasing. So I think a couple factors. One, many people may have heard of Silk Road and heard the website was taken down. Ross Ulbricht was charged, went to prison, and then he made $500 million, whatever the number was. And I think the next person's like, I could probably do that. And so then Alphabet pops up, and then eventually Alex Kazas gets arrested, and it comes to find out that he too made tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever the number is. And so I think there's always going to be this financial incentive for people to continue to do this. I think the other thing that's also increased it is the influx of fentanyl. So you can imagine moving in, pounds of marijuana would be very challenging through a border, distributed through the mail system. But if you can use fentanyl and lace other types of drugs, where it only takes a couple grains of salt to be able to potentially overdose from, and you put that in other pills, you can see how it's much easier to get that over the border, distribute around the country, and then mix it into whatever to make it better for distribution. So unfortunately, I think that's leading to it.
So, in your opinion, is the federal government adequately funding law enforcement to deal with this, both in terms of dollars and also of people with the necessary skill sets?
Don't forget also to hire lots of judges too. Those are also pretty.
I would say that there's an opportunity to teach a lot of law enforcement, whether federal, state, or local, about how to investigate cryptocurrency to benefit investigations. So like you can imagine, there's some very good tier 1 investigators, I'll call them, at the IRS, FBI, Homeland Security, and if there's a darknet market selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of drugs, that team's probably well equipped to be able to go out and investigate it and ultimately take it down. But what happens when somebody steals or loses $40,000 worth of Bitcoin? Can they go to a state and local person? Not necessarily. Is the tier 1 team that could potentially make this a successful case going to say, darknet market that's 10 people overdosed on, we're going to put that on hold to go get $40,000 back for this person that fell for a romance scheme? I think that's challenging to be able to balance those priorities.
Well, one thing I'll just add on top of that is, I think one of the things that always impressed me so much about Chris and many of his teammates at the IRS is that they all self-taught really themselves, because they are the first generation of the crypto cops, really. And so, I think there's always this concern about resources and things like that. When I was a prosecutor, maybe different now, I don't have as much visibility, but I was always impressed by people's dedication, as public servants, to spend those late night hours, right, teaching yourself the new tricks of the trade, again, the cat and the mouse. And it was always really impressive to see how the crew was really finding the ways to work with whatever resources that they had to get the mission, across the finish line.
It brings to me maybe a final question, which is for Chris mostly. When did you get involved in when did you know you wanted to be fighting cyber criminals? I mean, how did this happen when you were a kid? Were you just a super computer guy, very young?
I'll interject and say that his son pretended to be an FBI agent at one point while he was at the height of his success as an IRS agent. He's like, Dayton, what are you doing? Your dad's an IRS agent. Why are you pretending to be an FBI agent? So we won't speak to whether his son is following in the right footsteps or not.
Yeah, I wish I could say I had this beautiful 5-10-year plan that would lead me here today. But ultimately, I just wanted to do cool stuff with great people and just kept finding opportunities to be a part of it. The biggest kind of pivotal moment was in 2015, moving to DC to help start the IRS's cybercrimes unit. And we didn't really necessarily know what we wanted to do, and then cryptocurrency really just became that's the thing that IRS should be focusing on for this group. And I hearken back to our days at the academy. There'd be this plaque on the wall, and it says the world's greatest financial investigators. And I like to hope it's true. I'll leave it up to other people to decide. But there wasn't an asterisk on it that said only fiat, not Bitcoin. We saved that for the FBI or whatever else. And so we kind of saw that was an opportunity for us to find our lane and make it priority. And the other thing was just being able to kind of pivot amongst different types of cases.
I think it just really, for me, I think the same thing is that I would speak to law students all the time and remind them that when I was a law student, none of my law professors would have thought that I would ended up where I did. My best friend Rusty, I told him once, I was like, man, Rusty, do you think that you'd ever be the named partner in a law firm and I'd be a judge? He said, Zia, my wife didn't think that at the time. I'm sure no one else thought that, but I think it's a testament to what you can do when you get an opportunity in public service. We were given this broad remit, like a lot of responsibility, which is daunting, because if you use it unwisely, your next presentation, in fact, right, about the Innocence Project. What happens when people make mistakes? When you have this tremendous responsibility, it's devastating. But there's a flip side, which is that it is truly so exciting and exhilarating to have this opportunity. It's like, go save some kids, go fight terrorists, go do these things, right, which I never thought I was going to be able to do or would do, and do it in a team environment, right, that you have the people you're working with. It really was, we were so lucky, I think, to have that opportunity to be there and have the people around us, and had people, managers above us who said, we trust us, and said, just go do the right thing.
And I think you alluded to it before, which is you need some degree of tech savvy, of course, but really what this is gumshoe investigating, right? This is the classic tools of the trade.
There's no substitute for hard work, yeah. I mean, this is Chris and the team, people, they were all staying up late working. These were not 9-to-5 jobs. It can't be. It's not just even when the kids, right? With the terrorists or people overdosing on opioids, it's, you've got to put in long hours, but there is a reward to it, right? There's the satisfaction of you're doing the right thing, but then on top of that, we recovered, money for victims. For instance, the terrorism cases, when we seized the cryptocurrency, it was put in a fund where it went to victims of terrorism. So again, incredibly gratifying when people think they're funding terrorism. Instead, they're actually helping victims of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, guys. This has been tremendously educational, as promised. And please, round of applause for our...
Thank you.
We're gonna, if you click one more time on the thing, it'll let people know about our other upcoming programs.